naturalization, and I got to, happily live the life of trying to continue to study that, be a part of that world for the next 3 decades. I was all over the agency. The great thing about the agency is there's a lot of room for someone to maneuver around. So everywhere from temporary protected status to I-140, back when AC-21 was a new thing, to adjustment of status and naturalization. I became a manager at some point in the early 2000s, and so started moving around in those places. I worked with the refugee program. I got to see some interesting parts of the world that way, and then spent the last decade before taking one of the deals that many government employees were offered this summer. I spent the last decade in field operations, and I'll get a little bit into the agency organization, but that was, like I said, where I ended my career federally. As of the other day, all the paperwork is in and all the buttons were clicked, and so officially this was, I think my Independence Day is actually today, so I'm officially not part of the government. It might have been Friday, but there was a little discrepancy in the paperwork, so we'll say today. So I can tell you what I really think, I guess, without having to be too worried about politics. But that's me. Since I retired, the plan is to form a consulting company, help people and immigration lawyers and whoever try to access the U.S. legal immigration program the best ways that they can, and share what I've learned over the past 28 years as part of that. What I've learned, and what we're going to get into, this is the longest introduction ever, what we're going to get into in a minute is that the public who accesses and uses the services of the agency has been kept separate from the work, how, the knowledge about how the work is done, who does it, how it's done, and that's really unfortunate. And so I've spent the summer sort of learning that, talking to people, and over again, just having a moment where I recognize that what I've taken for granted for the past few decades is just not, something that other people have had access to. So happy to be on a platform like this today and share it for what it's worth. So I guess I will try to share my screen, and I just have a handful of slides, and they're not full of information, but they help me pace myself a little bit. So let me see. Do that. Let me know if nothing ever pops up. Am I sharing a screen?
Yep, something's going on.
All right, excellent.
We only do half of the screen though.
Okay, let me see. I'll hit the presentation mode, right?
Are you presenting?
I am not.
Maybe you can fit it to screen.
Yeah, is that any better?
Or you can scroll through the screen, because till now we can see 4 regional directors and then it cuts off.
All right, let me know if that's better. I know there's a little bit of a delay. It hardly matters. But the first thing I wanted to share is just a little bit about how field or operations is organized, and then I'll go back out to talk about the agency a little bit. But it's just organizational charts, right? So it helps me make a few points. But for field operations, if you can see it, I was the associate director, and with that job title came all of the operations that were in the United States that see people. That's a really easy way to remember it. So if you are all going through, or you have family members who've gone through the process and they've had to go in for an interview, that's the part of the organization that I guess I ran. And that was about 10,000 people if you include all the federal employees and all the contractors. 4,000 to 5,000 of those folks were immigration services officers, which we'll talk about more about who they are and what they do and all of that. It's about 100 facilities, and just, I won't read every bullet, but, it's a few million decisions every year. So,
Michael,
yep,
would it help if I share my screen and you can just tell me to go next, next, next? Would that help?
sure, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. So let me do
Sure.
that so that folks can
Awesome.
see the
Yep.
screen. One second. Sorry
Sorry
about
about.
that.
Nope, nope. That's
It's
my
okay.
technical skill. So
Give me
that's,
one.
yep, go ahead. I'll just, that was me, right? It was field operations and a lot of
Okay.
oversight into how the naturalization program, how the green card program was run, employment authorizations, the National Benefit Center, which did a lot of advanced parole, employment authorization, even intercountry adoptions. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And even EB-5, if you're familiar with that, the investing and creating jobs and getting your green card through that. If you want to go to the next slide, the point I wanted to make, again, this is an organizational chart, so it's not profound information, but really operationally, and when I say operationally, I mean the people who take your all's requests for whatever it is, a petition or an application for naturalization, and adjudicate those cases and either do an interview or just adjudicate them via paper, and maybe there's a request for evidence or not, happens in three main stacks. And those are the stacks on this page, right? Field operations, which is what I told you about. Service center operations, which I think, if this is normally an EB-1A discussion or an NIW discussion, that is where the majority of that work begins and is worked. And then the third piece is refugee asylum and international operations. In scale and scope, you'll see that field operations was the relative largest. There was, like I said, about 10,000 of us if you include contractors. Service center operations was a few thousand people smaller, and refugee asylum and those guys were a few thousand smaller than that even. The singular points, I guess that's I wanted to say about this chart though is the way the agency worked was very stovepiped, right? So I had my team and I had underneath those stacks, if you can see it on your screen, you saw the forms typically that they did. And so I had my resource, I could put them to those forms. If the leadership said, hey, we want to do all of the employment-based green card, we want to use all the visas we can, I could turn the levers and say, okay, for the next few months, we're going to do less 765s, we're going to do less N400s, and we're going to do more employment-based green cards. Service center operations, similarly, if leadership said, hey, there, under the last administration, there's about 1 million new TPS applications that were created. Venezuela and Haiti and other countries were granted TPS, and the resources that service center operations had were then divided between doing I-129s, I-140s, and those TPS applications, for example. It was really hard for someone like me to say, hey, can I help out? I see you have 1 million new pieces of work. Can I take a slice of those? Just the way their agency was organized, it was really difficult to say that. The exception to that, and again, you'll see in the next slide why I'm going this deep in this direction, was with green cards and occasionally petitions. There was some room between field operations and service centers to trade work around. So if there was pressure in anywhere in our organizations, we could share some of our personnel and some of our resources to that. What's key about that is over the years, in my experience at USCIS, premium processing is the most, from one perspective, the most important work the agency has. It earns a lot of revenue, right? You pay a lot for those. And if the agency doesn't meet its commitment, then the money goes back. So the agency has sort of guarded the resources around those particular forms that get to be submitted via premium processing. And so over the years, you'll see, for those of you who have been in this field and have been watching adjustment of status, for example, there was a time when the majority of justice of status cases happened in service center operations, and Texas Service Center, California Service Center, or Vermont would be working those cases. And then over the years, those one by one sort of came across, and instead the decisions would be coming from some of those field offices, the San Bernardino field office or the New York field office. And the reason for that is an example of what I was just talking about. In order to protect the agency's ability to do those premium cases and keep up with the commitment, the time commitment, and just to balance the workload, we move those cases across. So, I think at the end, I say all that to just say the agency is big. Maybe I should have said it's about 22,000 people big. And, a good portion of that are the decision makers, are adjudicators, and they are, it is every leader's ambition for them to be a pretty fungible resource, so that when there are more of a certain kind of applications, we have trained and ready people that we can adjust to that. The agency's organization has kind of been in the way of that over the years. But again, if anyone has been watching the agency over 30 years and who has time for that, they'll have seen that the agency is getting better at moving work around. So a long way to say that. But you can go to the next slide. I think that's just the organization. Happy to talk about the organization. Happy to talk any other parts about it later on. I get a lot of questions about how FDNS works, how the fraud folks blend in, and other pieces. But that's sort of the operational adjudications organization. So, here's sort of the meat of the presentation that at least I wanted to give. So who are the people that are looking at applications at USCIS? Like I said, it's about a 22,000 person organization. There are, these are big estimates. There are about 8,000 immigration service officers, and then another 1,000 to 2,000, says one on this slide, but I think there might be a little bit more than that, who are what we call ISO Immigration Service Officers 3, who are paid a little bit more, and they spend their time doing cases, but also mentoring and training. So the first box, it's their sole job to come to work and make decisions on cases, and the second group get some of the harder cases or are paid a little bit more to be, based on their experience and everything else, to mentor folks or take some of the harder cases or train folks. And we can talk a little bit more about maybe I'll stop there. So if you look at the salaries, right, and those are the base salaries from GS. So GS is the general pay schedule. Maybe you don't know that. So the 8,000. So that might look like a code. So I won't assume that folks know. So the very first box, there's about 8,000 immigration services officers. They are paid along a scale. GS is just the pay scale, GS 5 to 12. And what that means is that the lowest amount they would be paid is 34,000, and the maximum they would be paid is 98,000. Although there are adjustments. If you live in Washington, D.C. or New York or San Francisco, there's a percent add-on, and that could go up to 115 or 120,000 at the max. So that's, I find that really stark, because we have offices in those places that I said, as San Francisco and New York and everywhere, in urban centers and rural centers, and they have GS5 employees and they have GS12 employees. And the reason I wanted to sort of stop there and make that point is, can you imagine, and maybe you can, getting paid $34,000 to work in San Francisco, getting paid $50,000 to work in San Francisco? It's not a living wage for those urban environments, right? And so you can imagine they don't live in San Francisco, right? They live in the Central Valley, and they have a 90-minute commute in the morning and a 90-minute commute in the afternoon. So, just to sort of humanize the immigration services officer, they're just like the rest of us, right? Getting paid whatever they get paid, and they have to get to work. And this new administration has put a premium on being in the office and working, at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock, whenever their shift starts, and then getting out of the city. That's a hard life, just logistically, right? And then it's their job to be really smart about 50 or 60 different kinds of immigration benefit types throughout the day. And then they go home and they do it again the next day. So it's not to say pity the immigration officers, but it's my attempt to just humanize them, right? They're getting up, they're putting their kids to school, packing those lunches, and then rushing to the office, not for massive bucks, and working on some really sophisticated questions, right? You know, I was saying earlier before the call started, I had listened to some of the questions and answers and presentations on prior calls, and you know, it's deep stuff, and it's constantly changing, right? And is it cloud, is it AI, is it cloud AI? You know, they need to stay on top of that, and they need to understand all of the things happening in the world, because there are so many individuals who are trying to describe what they've done and what they're doing, and they need to be assessed. And you know, if we're talking EB1A, the criteria, and the agency needs to be, you know, conversant and be able to articulate what they have a question about or what they don't, and that's a challenge. So we can talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, and how that folks are trained. But what you know, what else is interesting about USCIS is there's a large portion of retired vets in the agency. I know, as someone who did a lot of hiring, the hiring rules are very favorable to those who have served the country in the armed forces. And, you know, frankly, my experience was, you know, not to a person, but the stresses of the day are a lot more, you know, I've seen people who've been in armed forces are much better at managing the stresses of the day. When you're trained about things that blow up, and you're trained to shoot guns, and maybe even you served overseas, you know, the stresses of the day in an administrative office atmosphere are just nothing to those individuals, and they are like, get the work done and move forward. Tell me what I need to learn. They have a very, you know, if you need to learn 3 things, they will learn 3 things and they will put it to work. So I loved hiring vets, and about, like I said, 1/4 of the agency is that. And then USCIS, unlike every other part of the Department of Homeland Security, is majority female. So, and that goes up through leadership, much more so than other parts of the agency, of the department, which makes sense. You know, the rest of the department is composed of law enforcement organizations, which are historically obviously very masculine and very male heavy. USCIS is not, and you will see that as you compare. I think there's another slide next.
Michael, I'm going to bring this up because we were having a fine conversation with this, that there was a recent tweet by USCIS recruiting officers, and one line really jumped out and made headways in X/Twitter is there was no college degree required. And that becomes very pertinent in EB1A cases, because my was an EB1 where we were talking about all these sophisticated patterns and industry adoption, only to be assessed by somebody who's been recruited without a college degree. So I wanted to know your comments on that.
Yeah, no, great question, or a great point. So referring back up to the first box again, right, there is a span, the first 2 boxes, there's a span of pay. And generally the way, you know, there's federal hiring is a mess and really complicated if you all have ever looked into it. So I'm going to gloss over it, but the lower education and experience credentials you have, the lower that you'll be able to start pay, right? And the more education, the more experience, the higher in that grade structure, 5 to 12, you'd be able to start, right? So absolutely, you could, an individual without a college degree could qualify to be an immigration service officer, you know, if they're a veteran or if they have other experiences, and begin as a grade 5 employee. Now that, through time and experience, that individual can become a grade 7 and a grade 9 and a grade 11 and come up. So it's absolutely true that they could be at the top of the pay scale without a college education. What the agency has done historically, and really was moving to do more and more so when I left it, was we had assigned work based on the GS levels, right? So the use case that you stated probably, you know, I want to say will never happen, but things happen, so I'll never say it that conclusively, but probably would never happen. So the GS5, the new employees who are just coming to the agency without a college degree, would be assigned, and you know, certainly what I did in my organization would be assigned things like employment authorization documents. You know, so if you submit your your I-765 based on a pending adjustment of status, there's very little discretion there, right? And the individual would look into the system and say, yes, Valverde has his his 485 is pending, so yes, he's eligible. You look in a different system and say that my fingerprint's cleared and there's no criminal issue. You'd look in a third system and say there's no travel issue, and you'd stamp that okay, right? And that's not the same as, right, what maybe a GS12 or 11 who's doing some of the EB1 considerations and articulating back and saying, yes, you've knocked out 3 or you knocked out 2, but we have an RFE on your third criteria or whatever. So we would assign work by experience, right? And so could that GS5 individual spend some time in the organization, show promise and skill, and get assigned harder and more complicated workloads? We hope so. That was what the agency's plan was. But off the bat, I don't think you'll see new people who haven't been in an organization who they're hiring this summer based on those crazy Twitter messages to be assigned the real complicated work. I would expect, like I said, employment authorization and other things. Now, having said that, the agency is going through a real change in personnel, right? They let about 10% of us go, or I shouldn't say I was let go. I took one of the retirement deals, and now they're hiring again. So, just the math says the agency is going to get a lot lower in its experience level. A lot of attorney acquaintances and friends of mine have seen requests for evidence and notices of intent to deny that look very strange or very boilerplate or seem to miss some things, and have said that instances of that are growing. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's a sort of an outcome of the lowering of the experience level at the agency. Yeah, so here's what I was kind of getting at. How do they do all the decisions, right? It's a crazy prospect when you think about it, right? So how do around 8 or 10,000 people make decisions? There's 10 million-ish new applications across all types filed per year. So how do those people make decisions, and how can it be that they're expected to to be smart about the panoply of decisions types that they're out there? Well, you can refer back to the very first slide. They break up the work and they assign it, and different parts of the organization specialize in knowing different parts of the law and operationalizing how your facts meet the legal requirements, and that manifests into an approval, a denial, a request for evidence, or whatever. It starts with just 6 weeks of training. Which, again, if you look across immigration law, people have said over the years that tax law is the most complicated body of law, followed by immigration law. Immigration law has, 3 very high level principles, make the economy better, humanitarian, you reunite families. But then when you go into it, as you all know who are trying to access, the legal immigration process in the U.S., the law does not track. The law is really just a series of provisions that you have to navigate to get to where you want to go. So out of 6 weeks, what I would expect as a manager in the organization was not someone coming out of that training who is an expert on anything, right? So they were exposed to the big principles. They were exposed to admissibility. They generally knew what an immigrant was and what a non-immigrant is, the different types of non-immigrants, the different forms that go with those types, and some of the major concepts that apply to those forms. And then they were reassigned back to the office that they were hired in. And that's where on-the-job training, so that's OTJ, happens. So for the next few months, I know in my organization, we had a plan where they were mentored, and they couldn't make decisions or do an interview until they showed their ability to do them, with heavy review over a number of times, and then they were allowed to work more independently. And so there's a lot of hand-holding to get them up to speed. Again, if you think about the agency as something as large as I mentioned, 22,000 people, every week, right, every pay period, probably, between 50 to 100 people were leaving the government, retiring or whatever. and joining the government. So over the course of the year, a good portion of the agency changed anyhow. And I say that to say, the personnel flow really brought a lot of new people in. Those new people were trained on I-765's employment authorization or advanced parole requests. And the older people who had been in the agency, the more experienced people who had been in the agency would, gradually get newer assignments of more complicated work. So the more complicated work was rarely staffed by the newest people. The more complicated work is staffed by the people who have the longest tenure in the agency. So a lot of time was spent on regular or ad hoc training, on if there's a new policy, getting that out. A new policy, again, on national interest waivers or an EB-1 would not be trained to all 8,000 immigration services officers. It would be trained on the group of people doing that work, right? And so if someone sort of graduated, to use a term like that, into that team, then they would get brought into it and they would have that same mentoring and training until they were up to speed on that new kind of work. Now, having said all that, going to the third bullet, and probably going longer than I meant to, the agency has to run. And one of the things that it, I'm sure, doesn't feel like from the outside, but we're very, beyond the premium processing use case where we know the agency has to get something out in a certain number of days, agency leadership is very focused on getting the decisions out as fast as possible. And we do that, just like anyone in a sort of a management chain. We give people targets, we count, we talk about their performance, we talk about their quality, we plan, we have X number of officers, and that means we're going to have X number of hours, and we know it takes on average X minutes per case, and we target it up. Throughout my whole 28 years, we have this is a conclusive statement, we've never had enough people to match the hours of work that we believed we had on hand. So it was always an uphill struggle to get those processing times down. I was very proud in the citizenship area. We were able to get them down. In the adjustment of status area, we were able to get them down a little bit, but it was always a battle for us. And then the last thing I'll say, again, I know I'm going super fast over a very complicated agency, is that this administration has been very clear about the importance of working in a facility, right? Put it as plainly as I can. They were very skeptical about telework. They were very skeptical about remote work. And, so who cares, right? But it has a real organizational impact. If you remember at the very first, the second slide showed service center operations and field operations. In field operations, we always worked in offices because we had to interview people, and people had to come in and they had to have their fingerprint taken sometimes. And, so it's very in-person, visceral thing. But in service center operations, those 8,000 people over the Biden administration had gradually become, I think, almost 90% remote workers. So 9 out of 10 people got up, went to their basement office and opened up their laptop, and they worked. And, anyone who's done that work can appreciate, right? That's a lot easier than getting up and getting all the things you need to get done and then taking a 90-minute commute from the Central Valley into San Francisco and then doing the same at the end of the day. Again, not to make it a sympathy thing, but in terms of time available to work, that allowed service center operations to spend millions and millions of dollars on overtime, right? When you're not in your car for 3 hours a day, you can work overtime and make premium money for it. And that allowed them to do a heck of a lot more work. Again, if you pay attention to processing times, what you've seen starting in May was a sort of precipitous rise in processing times. And a lot of that was just because people had to go into the office. Nothing more sinister than that. We can certainly talk about all the policies that the Trump administration is putting into place to make things more complicated or harder, because that will have an impact. But the very first thing they did was just make people go into the office, and that eliminated the equivalent of hundreds and hundreds of people's hours worth of work every year over the course of a year in order to do the work that you all are submitting. So the, like the real agency impact of processing times of something that seemed like return to work, who cares, was significant. So I guess I'll stop there because I think I went longer. The very last thing I'll say is the Trump administration, right, is super skeptical about all kinds of things, and it's manifesting in, right, the last few days or the last few weeks. They had the student rule. They have said, although we haven't seen the proposals yet, that they're going to limit. I don't think they said eliminate, but limit OPT, and they certainly have made lots of changes to the H-1B program, and I got to believe that there are more to come, right? What is happening, there, right? Whether it's, I read somewhere someone called it, some tariff negotiations, and other people had different reasons for it, but the sum of the parts, right, is truly the agency is trying, or the government is trying to take apart that traditional pathway of student to OPT to H-1B to I-140 and make that more difficult, right? No matter what their reasons are, that's the sum of the actions that they've taken. If you've been paying attention, in the past few days, some of those actions that they have taken have been challenged in the courts. So we'll see where that comes out. If the last Trump administration is an example, they made a lot of changes, and then sort of one by one they were challenged in the court, and sort of one by one they were reversed. And the end of the Trump administration felt the rules at the end of the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, felt like they were a lot similar to the rules that they inherited when they began. I'm not sure that that's going to be the case this time. The courts are certainly very different. But what I mean to say about all of this is we're in the middle of a process where they put it out there, what they want to do. And I think there's more to come. One by one, those things will be challenged. Some of those challenges will be successful, others won't. And in another, bit of time, maybe by the spring, the landscape will be more known, right? We'll know if there's going to be a $100,000 charge for H-1B, or we'll know if they were able to stick with their changes to the F-1 program. We'll know what their changes are for the OPT. And you all will be able to adjust and continue your path based on those rules. One thing, and then this is the last thing I'll say before we can jump into questions, is no matter what, at the end of it, the agency exists to take the requests from folks who want immigration status, immigration benefits, and apply the facts of their life and their case to the rules that are in place, right? They cannot stop doing that. They could slow it down. They can change the rules. Can't really change the law without Congress, and Congress hasn't been real effective in this space for a few decades now. So I don't think that it's existential for the processes that you are all going through. I think they will exist. They'll be changed. Life is change. But I put this up to make this point, and maybe this is obvious. See how this was from, I think, the Twitter account or the X account from one of the agencies, either DHS or USCIS. Protect your homeland. Yeah, sure. They've been saying that forever, but defend your culture feels a little gross, especially for that agency, because there are many cultures that come to the agency, and navigating those is what we did for 38 years. So that's their attitude, and that's maybe where they're coming from. But they still have to apply the facts of your case to the law, and they can't not do that. Will the gray area go your way? Will you get benefit of the doubt? Probably not. They're going to try to make it as rigorous as possible, and I just put this up there to make the point that you're still going to be able to seek the things you're seeking, but you must be rock solid. You must be absolutely sure that you're leaving the adjudicator, you're leaving the agency no place to rule against you for that, right? This is not the time to assume that the adjudicator will connect the dots. This is not the time to take a leap. You need to work with your team and your attorney and whoever is on your side and just articulate why EB1A, why you meet each of those criteria, and weave it all together, because no matter what, they're going to have to do your case. But I think, it's very clear based on everything from the president to the director of USCIS on down, it is not going to go your way in the gray area, in the middle area. But we'll see. But I'll stop there. I didn't mean to stop on a doom and gloom place. That was supposed to be more positive. Like they can't take it away, but they are clearly trying to make it as difficult as possible.
Correct. Well, thank you so much. I mean, folks, if you can put your hands together, there's a button for you to clap. Thank you so much, Michael, for that. I made 3 points, 3 things that I learned about USCIS from what you said today. Number 1 is the fact that you can do a lot of lateral movements. And whoever I have had the pleasure of knowing from USCIS, I've seen their tenures are anywhere between 10 years to 15 years, which gives me the impression that it's a pretty traditional organization where you have these long tenures. So that's 1. Is there somebody talking? Second one was, it's not haphazard, like this chatter that you see on Twitter, which just jumps to the conclusion that, oh yeah, no college degree, somebody assessing someone's profile who's a director of software engineering. May not happen. And the third thing, and the most important thing is, USCIS officers are also doing their job. And might I say, for a lot less people in this room, because I know their salary criteria, so I know what you make. So I'm going to leave you with that. But the conception that I had in my mind about USCIS, I don't know if Michael is still here because I can't see him.
Yeah, still here.
I was made to believe that, how many people are Harry Potter fans over here? Can I see with a show of hands? Nobody's a Harry Potter fan? Okay, good. I felt like, USCIS is like the prisoner of Azkaban and they're Death Eaters and they're just trying to get you. Not true. They're not stormtroopers. They're trying to do their job. Obviously, they have to go with what the leadership is saying. But like Michael said, that they have to do their job. And as far as the things that we control, we want to make them forward as possible. So thank you again, Michael, for shining that light on USCIS. Avinash, I'm going to put you on mute. Folks, if you can put yourselves on mute. How many people are ready to ask some questions? Okay, some ground housekeeping rules. I know we have immigration attorneys in the house. Dobrina, I know you want to ask a question. I do want to give us immigrants a chance because I know lawfully does a whole bunch of events for lawyers, but we rarely get an opportunity to ask questions directly to a former USCIS leadership. So yes, Dobrina, I'm going to give you the floor, but I will give us immigrants the first chance to go for it. Is that cool? All the immigration attorneys in the house. All right, folks. Everybody, 1 question per person, not 1 question A, 1 question B, just 1 question, and we'll move on. SSGG, we'll start with you, and then we'll go down the list.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Michael, for the background. My question is, do officers at USCIS use AI detectors for petitions, and would they reject if there's any AI usage?
So, great question. When I left in May, so I retired the other day, but when I left, some of that.
Is it just me, or is Michael's voice cutting off?
Not able to hear it.
Cutting off.
Michael, I don't think he's able to hear us. Michael, your voice is cutting off. We're not being able to hear you.
Is that any better?
Yeah, this is a lot better. Yeah, if you can repeat what you just said.
Yeah, sorry, no, that's totally my fault. Yes, there was some of that when I left the agency, and the intention was to do more of that. So I can't say it's happening in which particular use cases, but I know that there was some work being done in that. There was, yes. So I'll just say yes.
Nahmed Nisar.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to ask, is there a possibility that the agency uses some tools to automate, mundane work so that it does not have to heavily depend on the employees to get the decisions fast out? Like having a checklist if this guy meets like these sort of criteria. So just give a fast decision, like sort of like an automation to make the decisions faster. That's my question.
Great question. So without making it a super long answer, I had the vantage point of being in the agency as and it continues to do this, right? But as it moved from 100% paper to more of a digital processing experience, depending on the benefit types. And I've seen that, right? We used to have humans who had paper checklists, and they would go through the file and check it and move it in different directions based on the results of that initial analysis. There is a lot of front end automation that does that. And really, the gold happy place for me was always to give decision makers all the facts set up in front of them. So all they had to use was, sort of their brains, right? They did not have to check systems to say for, binary yes or no, because we could present that to them, and, robotics or something else can do that. So yes, there's a great bit of that. And I think there's going to be more and more as the agency enables itself to use, the technology that's out there. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Aditi?
Oh, I can go next? Okay, sorry, I saw the green hand up. All right. Hey, thanks, Michael. Thank you so much for this session. My question is related to, all of us here have, probably critical roles and original contributions and things like that. But, all of us are working towards creating a profile for EB1A. Now, since you said, it's getting stricter out there, you think if, there's some scholarly articles that has been published only maybe over a period of 2 years or maybe a year, and you're submitting that as a criteria, is that a red flag?
Like I mentioned, this is not a forum to ask EB1 questions.
Okay.
This is primarily for USCIS based questions. So do you want to pivot that question to make it a more broader scope for Michael to be able to comment?
Sure. Like what are the red flags? Let's say if I submit something, can you generalize it then?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. And I don't want to be over dramatic on the, the point I made that the gray area is not going to be working in your favor if it ever was. But that's it, right? All of the eligibility I always like to train people on, right? It is there's a Nobel Prize winner, and then there's someone who is just like starting in their field, and there's everything in between. And if you have, this isn't a red flag answer, but right, if you have a concern about whether there's been enough time where you've shown that criteria or success, then yeah, these days, more is better, right? And that's an answer that you all know. But I think the work that you do, you talk to your attorney, you listen to folks on your listservs and all of that, you'll see that there is a lot of there's a lot more RFEs and NOIDs coming out on use cases just like you described. And you want to choose your time, right? And choose when you have the best set of facts to meet all the criteria, and be sensitive to changes like that. So yeah, I think they will be looking at things like what's the sustained period and other things, and you'll have to make that judgment call. So I hope that's helpful. I mean, I don't know that it would be a red flag, but again, it's silly to say, but more is better. And this is a time where you work with your team and figure out if now or spending some more time developing your profile is what you want to do.
Okay.
So Michael, one of the questions that could answer her question is, can you comment on what the mindset of a USCIS officer is when they are starting to check your petition? Is it A, null hypothesis, I'm going to have to deny this case. You're going to have to show me why I need to give this to you. Or B, I want to approve your case. Tell me all the reasons why I should not do it. So
Yeah.
if something starts from a denial mindset, the other one is from an approval mindset. So where would you say that mindset exists?
Yeah, no. So that's a great question. The all the adjudicators are like all of us, and they come to the office with all the baggage of their lives. So there are both, right? There are, there are people who I'll be dramatic, but I don't know that this is too much of an exaggeration. People who love the mission and really see it as a mission of welcoming, right? And I think the last administration had welcoming in some of the words about how we describe the agency. And then there are some people who probably are happy to see the change of this administration, and they want to make sure that their wages are there and the impact on the American worker. And there's, I don't know if it's political, or they're very passionate. They're people who have very passionate feelings about the impact of their job. It was our job as managers to give them, the lines to work within, right? So that first person couldn't just approve everything without being questioned, and that second person just couldn't deny everything or send out RFEs or NOIDs without having to have review. So, there's all sorts of individuals that come to that work. The way that we train is we talk about the preponderance of the evidence, or if there's a different legal standard, right? If you meet that legal standard and you go over by 1% or whatever, then you're going to get an approval, whether we love it or hate it or whatnot, sort of dispassionately, that's going to be the way we work. It's hard when you have that many thousand people to navigate that. So there certainly are people who approach it in both of your categories, but the way we train it, the way that we approached it as we had mentors, and those questions was really be dispassionate, apply the facts to the law and the policy, and the outcome is determined by those things.
Got it. There's another Aditi. Aditi.
Thank you for the forum, Aditi. Michael, I had a question on how EB1A cases are processed within the agency. So I know when I talk to a bunch of lawyers, the cases usually turn out to be like 400,000 pages of huge, dense documentation. Does the officer go through all of those, or is there a process that they use? How much time do they, on average, spend on this? I kind of wanted to understand from you how those are processed.
Sure. No, great question. The premise is, if it's submitted, it should be reviewed, right? And that's how we train. Being an officer and having been one in my life, a skill for survival and success is to be able to navigate those piles of documentation quickly, right? And so the advice I always give, and I gave it to an individual just on Friday, who showed me how they were putting together some of the supporting document, is you have to, you maximize your chances to succeed by taking my hand and taking me through it. So the attorney letter, all the letters, making references to all the attachments, tabs, and all of that. But yes, it's all reviewed. The most successful, easiest cases to work through are ones where I really felt like my hand was taken through, and they said, I'm now saying this about myself, and here's the thing on tab 64 that is the evidence of that, right? So it's what you spend your time doing as you prepare your case. And then I would say that the most beneficial skill as an officer that you get, just like you all do in your careers, right? When you're in grad school, as I'm sure so many of you are, you get assigned 600 pages of reading due next Thursday, right? And you get really good at knowing which of those 600 pages you need to get through before you get the idea or you get the concept, whether it's, good, bad, or indifferent. So the skill that helps immigration services officers survive, especially in, the asylum context is the same way. You get piles of paper, country conditions, and everything else. You need to go through it because you can't not go through it just for due diligence sake, and there could be something there, but you need to get really good at knowing when the burden has been hit, knowing when the right words were used, and knowing when you've seen enough evidence, and then move on. it's it's sort of a grind of a job otherwise, and you just need to develop those skills to get through it. I hope that's helpful.
Michael, I'm curious, and this is something that one of the immigration attorneys, she has been practicing EB-1A cases, but now she's retired. She told me that she does a whole bunch of snooping around in the job description pages of USCIS. So this is a question motivated by that. And the question is, what are some of the internal incentives / promotions that immigration officers are given that could affect how they adjudicate cases? So for example, there was immigration attorney said that there are awards given for detecting fraud. So I don't know how accurate that is. I might be fuddling like her words, but there are awards that are given for the most something. So I'm wondering what kind of incentives are there inside USCIS that could affect an adjudicator's behavior?
Now that's another really good question, because there are many theories and perspectives on that. So, very practically, like monetary awards are, it's the government, so it's super prescribed, and it goes to your end of the year ratings. And it's, if you do look in the job description, you'll see that X percentage of your job is about making decisions, and other X percentage is about the quality of those decisions, and maybe some percentage of that decision is about finding and articulating fraudulent issues if you see them. So all of that is summarized, just like many of us in our other jobs, and you get an end of the year rating and you get some money. Beyond that, though, there are different awards in different offices and different categories, and absolutely there are awards for in the well, I guess I don't have to name names, but there used to be a part of my organization that had an award if you got above a certain number of cases in a time period, right? And you completed, approve, deny, or whatever the number of cases. I also felt a little uncomfortable for that, because that might be an incentive to just not read the 400 pages and move quickly. There were incentives about finding fraud. Absolute, or not incentives, I should say, but awards. But those generally weren't monetary awards. They were like certificates or trophies. But there are all sorts of ways to motivate employees, but they are based on, so your colleague was right, the elements of the job description. And the job description of an immigration services officer is generally, quantity, quality, and fraud. And if you can show that you can get a lot of cases through, approve, deny, whatever, and they are good cases when they're reviewed. They're not, they're not subject to litigation. They're not subject to appeal. And if you do see something that doesn't make sense and you refer it over to the fraud team, they are very conscious of trying to balance it. We always were anyway. So we didn't want to balance the incentive to go as fast as possible. We didn't want to build an incentive to deny every case. We didn't want to build an incentive to find fraud in every instance, but we wanted to open the officer's ability to be able to do the right thing on each case. So absolutely, I think all of those rumors are probably true. There probably is a fraud award, at the same way as there's an award for effectiveness and speed.
Yeah. I mean, again, USCIS officers, just like you and I, are trying to do a job. They're incentivized by similar things. So keep that in mind when you are writing your petition, that if this person is incentivized for quality and speed, are you giving them that opportunity to deliver? So keep something to consider. Suresh Kumar. Oh, you snooze, you lose. Subhanallah.
Yeah, hi, Michael. My question to you is regarding the request for evidence. I've heard of late that the officers are issuing a lot of requests for evidence, especially when filing premium processing. So can you just tell us how true is it?
Yeah, no, great question. I've heard that a lot. I think the data shows that it's pretty similar across types. Again, I let you all know I would defer to you all from your experience, and especially if there are attorneys on the call, maybe they have had a different experience. But I think overall, the data show that requests for evidence are pretty consistent percentage-wise from premium and non-premium I-140s. There's certainly, I think that the rumor or whatever is that that's an easy escape valve when you're up against the premium clock and the agency doesn't want to refund money. And so if they just can't get to the end of the case, they'll issue an RFE, and maybe you'll get an RFE and it'll ask for the same 10 things that you submitted already. That's more an example, I think, of just, bad leadership, bad training, rather than, maybe bad officer. I hate to say that because I always feel like the bosses are responsible, but maybe that's a one-off. But I think the long way of saying the percentages are about the same. So I think you get the same kind of review. I think the premium team just are a bunch of individuals who, I don't know how they find their way there, but they are very good at what I was talking about earlier, is going through those 400 pages and seeing the relevant things faster than other people who go page by page and read all the words on the page.
Awesome. Folks, I can see people raising their hands. I did book Michael till 1 p.m. Michael, is it okay if you take it for 10 more minutes?
Sure.
15? Okay, perfect. So 1:15 is the last cutoff, and Dobrina gets the last question. So everybody else before that, they'll get all the questions. Palash.
Yeah, thank you, Aditi, and thank you, Michael, for doing this and for the insightful information. I have one question. So, because of, and correct me if I'm wrong if I'm asking this question, I don't know, but yeah, if because of the recent government shutdown and things like that, how these delays are expected to last? Like if you are in between filing the change of status petitions and all those things.
Yeah. Now, so these are not normal times. Normal times are USCIS is very minimally impacted by a government shutdown, and that's what I would have said, right? The funding doesn't go away. The fees that you submit would be paying the salaries, and so those don't stop. They're not appropriated dollars that have ended because of the government shutdown. So in my experience, excuse me, we continue to adjudicate. The agency continues to adjudicate. The leader of the agency did post something online on X or somewhere about how the shutdown will impact some processing. So I think it remains to be seen. But it kind of goes back to what I was trying to say earlier. They can't not process cases. That's a problem. They're there to process cases. You have paid money and the agency owes you a decision. They can slow down and they can make changes, but they're going to keep doing it. So I would say it remains to be seen. I don't know the answer to your question. Normally, there would be no impact. This director has said there could be impacts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know that answer because the normal times and the processing premium times are same, like right now.
Yes.
Whatever.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. There's no
Yeah.
impact on the premium times. They will fight to the last minute to keep that money and to get you your decisions.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Priti Bhattarai.
Hey, my question was in regarding the final action dates and stuff. Things have been moving more rapidly these days, and I was wondering what's your take on it and where that comes from in terms of making the decisions and why it has been going on, and what can we expect for the future, at least in the next 1 to 2 years while this administration is going on.
No, I love that question. So as it sounds like so many dates have moved forward, and the agencies they're using final action dates, and what that means for the moment is that the Department of State and the USCIS staff have looked across the inventory of work in the system and do not feel particularly confident that they will be able to use all of the employment-based immigrant visas this year. And so those actions will, result in much more activity, many more filings, I-140s and concurrently filed 485s, or folks getting their visas overseas. What you'll want to watch is over the next few months, do the dates keep moving forward, or do they switch to the filing dates, or do they start moving back? So that will be the signal when the agency feels like it has enough work to use those immigrant visas throughout the balance of the year. One thing that I think I've seen in the data is that filing rates have dropped, right? So normally every month the agency expects a certain 10,000 number or whatever the right number is of EB1As or all the other categories come in, and sort of across the board those filing rates have been lower than expected. So I think that helps explain the the fact that the agency doesn't believe it will have enough sort of work on hand to use all those visas, and thus they move the dates forward, and they're trying to get more folks in. If those rates pick back up, and how fast they pick back up will predict how the priority dates will move or not move going forward. So I think right now, I would be saying get it while you can. If this is your time to file, then make it, because you don't know if they will have created enough volume to again stop moving those numbers forward, or what. But I think it's a good sign in terms of filing, because right now they need your work to use the visas.
Adriana Soto Ospina.
Hi, hello. My question is, it's true that officers are treating individuals from specific countries, with some kind of discrimination. I am specifically asking about Venezuela, because it's not a secret that this administration is trying to remove a lot of people from Venezuela. So I don't know, it's a false rumor or what, because I hear some lawyers actually saying that they feel that Venezuelans people for EB1s or EB2 are treated different.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. If we were talking about TPS or asylum, then there are real sort of policy views that the administration is taking that will impact those kinds of cases, right? Country conditions and other things. But for the EB1 and 2 and that sort of thing, I didn't see it. I think that I didn't see it. I'll stop there. I didn't see it in anything outside, like I said, other than the asylum and maybe some of the refugee adjustment cases where they have country condition type issues.
Pramit.
Yeah. Hi, Michael. First of all, I will say this is the most attention I've paid in a webinar in a long time. Thank you so much. Had a question about reporting structure. I'm really glad you went through how chain down the command. I wanted to ask you about, I know that it says that the USCIS reports to Department of Homeland Security. I'm curious about what are the other organizations that do dotted line or are very influential. I would assume it's White House, Congress and stuff, but aside from its direct vertical, what are the other organizations in the government that influence you as a USCIS, or you have reports to?
Sure. No, I mean, obviously we all work for the White House. Or we did. I guess I'm happy to say I don't anymore. And maybe everyone gets this, and this isn't a particularly profound thing to say, but the more important an issue is, the more the White House will care about what you do, right? So, for years when I worked at the Immigration and Naturalization Service and INS, we did not have a lot of interaction with the White House. Over the last decade, immigration has just become super political, and all of a sudden we started knowing the people who work for the National Security Council and other parts of the White House and interacting with them a lot. So yes, that's the direct line, White House Department, Homeland Security, and then the Immigration Service, the Citizenship and Immigration Service. We certainly do talk a lot to colleagues, or I did, we use past tense, with colleagues in Department of Labor. We talked a lot with colleagues at ICE. We talked a lot with colleagues at CBP because, for example, early in my career, I wrote a memo about dual intent, and we made dual intent possible for H's and L's where it wasn't before. And, we had to coordinate with our colleagues who were actually admitting people at the ports of entry. So there's a lot of that work with colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security. And then just a lot of one-offs, right? Over the refugee program, when I worked there, we coordinated a lot with State Department and a lot with colleagues in HHS, Health and Human Services. So depending on the program, there's a lot of coordination, but the direct line is really just the DHS and the White House.
Awesome. Avinash is going to be the last person who's going to ask a question, followed by Dobrina, and then we'll let Michael go. So Avinash, make it good.
Just say that Dobrina is a person too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael and Aditi, for hosting this session together around this uncertain time. My question is, with the increasing use of templated RFEs in NIW cases, how can I be confident that the adjudicator has genuinely reviewed my petition? And what steps can I take to ensure they actually read it?
No, that's a great question, and it sounds like you either experienced or have been reading about some of the things that I've heard as well, that there are people not infrequently submit very thoughtful and detailed packages, and they get an RFE asking for 90% of the same things that they believe were in the initial submission, and then they take a deep breath and they resubmit what they submitted. So unfortunately, that is that is that is an unfortunate part of the process right now. So my sort of first advice is to every RFE, read it and make sure. Don't just assume it's asking for the same stuff. See if there is any indication that they've found what you've submitted needs further explanation or doesn't meet the standard. But if it truly is sort of the template RFE that's asking for the same exhibits as you had, take a breath, resubmit it, see if there's any place in your package that you can, like I said, you need to take me by the hand and lead me through it. But unfortunately, there's a lot of that. The good news is if that matures into a notice of intent to deny, someone has to articulate why you're not meeting the burden, right? And if they're not examining the evidence that you submitted, then that's a great starting point for the response to a notice of intent to deny. And it's unfortunate that you're there and you have to point out what you've been pointing out now 2 or 3 times, but people work through that. There's also, unfortunately, to Aditi's question before, there are some officers who you get that NOID or you get that RFE and it appears that they are not going to approve you no matter what. And certainly I've spoken to attorneys, and I'm sad that this is a viable strategy, but they will withdraw and they'll resubmit, hoping they get someone other than that officer for the next time that it's reviewed, so they have a more open-minded person to take a look at their case.
Awesome. Final question, Dobrina. Thank you so much for your unrelenting patience. You promised you're going to be nice, so I'm counting on you to be nice.
I think I was nice.
All right, go for it.
Thank you, Michael, for all the information. So this is actually a question that clients ask me all the time, so it's not like a me question, although I had those too. But as like the EB1 and NIW, there are 2 service centers that process these petitions: the Nebraska Service Center and the Texas Service Center. So a lot of the clients, they ask me, okay, so which one is friendlier? Then they'll say, well, there are rumors that Nebraska is stricter, the Texas is friendlier. So my question is, do the officers at these both service centers, do they go through the same training? And if they go through the same training, does the leadership in the both service centers matter? Like the messaging within matter in terms of the decisions? I hope I make sense.
Yeah, no, you make a lot of sense. So, yeah, that's not a mean question. So thank you for your thank you for going easy. I think that was a great question. There was a lot of truth into the ideas behind your question a few years ago. And I'm sure there's still some truth. But what the folks at Service Center Operations have spent a lot of time doing over the past few years through electronic systems and through processes is getting rid of the twin service center. I'm explaining it poorly, but now you have much more of a chance of having anyone from any of the service centers pick up your case who's qualified to do it. They have tried to move as much as they can to a first in, first out, or at least first in, first touched case. And so if you send it, I'm trying to remember how their filing rules are. You'll know better than me, but probably a lot of stuff you send goes to and comes from Texas, but that's really a function of the electronic process to actually print out paper and put it in the mail. What happens in between is your paper is scanned, it is put up there, and then the next available officer who has those skills pulls it down and works it, right? So It's harder now to say that different service centers have different personalities in terms of, years ago on like the H-1B side, it was so stark. California Service Center did a request for evidence for like 40%, whereas, Vermont did like 15%. And, that was exactly what you said. It was just managers said, no, we don't like that here in California. And managers in Vermont said, we do like that here in Vermont. And they didn't often get together. Our colleague, the colleagues in service center operations have spent a lot of time making sure that happens less and less. So absolutely, there's been a historic tendency. There used to be, as you know, right, 2 different processing times for those service centers. Good if you're on the faster one, bad if you're on the slower one. Now they're really trying to do everything sort of nationally, and that should have the impact, you tell me, of sort of lessening those differences. And it might even be harder for you to know who's actually doing the work and where they're sitting. Because I think every decision is now printed out at the same place, but it doesn't mean, or every RFE says send your thing to Texas, but those are just the people who get it, scan it, and put it back up in the system, and the person takes it back. So I hope that's responsive.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome, folks. This brings us to the end of today's talk. How many people are still here paying attention? See, I'm a professor, so I always gauge people's attention. How many people are engaged?
Is there a way I can ask a quick question regarding that?
Ranjita, not anymore, because we have to let folks go. I do have a request for folks. You are going to get an email from TopMate, and I just don't want you to give this session a compliment. What I want you to do is this. Please write in the testimonial one thing that you thought USCIS was, but then after listening to Michael, your thought process changed, or something new that you learned about USCIS. Because for Michael, who has been working in USCIS for 28 years, a lot of these things that are like light bulb moments are just regular information that Michael has in his back pocket, but can change the game for us. So please take a moment to write that what is something new that you learned about USCIS that you never knew before, but after Michael said it, there was a shift in perspective. So I'm going to package it all up, and I'm going to send that to Michael with the hope that he comes back and he tells his colleagues who have also left USCIS to come share their knowledge and help us bridge the gap between us immigrants who are trying to get an immigration benefit and USCIS who's going to give us that immigration benefit. So thank you again, Michael. Any last words of advice for the 111 people who stuck around?
No, man. No. So just thanks for listening. The only advice I guess I would give is these are strange times, and I think you are right to feel a little nervous or attacked because some of the traditional pathways that you're planning to access are changing or are attacked by people with the people in power right now. Take a breath if that's possible. The litigation will figure out what the new path is, and maybe the new path is the old path, or the new path is the changed path, and then you'll have the recipe for being successful. So just thanks for having me is the last thing I'll say.
Thank you, Michael. I'm gonna send the recording when it's out. It's going to be uploaded on my YouTube channel on Wednesday. I will send you that link. I will send you Michael's LinkedIn. Please drop a kind word for Michael. Thank you again for being so generous with your time. And remember, send me that write-up. Like, what did you think about USCIS before versus after? So I can send that to Michael. Thank you again, folks. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.